In the wheat fields of central Ukraine and eastern Romania 6,000 years ago, people built cities, not villages, not towns, cities of perhaps 15,000 inhabitants, larger than anything that existed in Mesopotamia at the time, larger than anywhere in Europe for the next 3,000 years. They built them in tight, concentric rings of houses arranged on geometric plans. They lived in them for 60 or 80 years. Then they burned them to the ground, walked away, and built another one nearby. The civilization is called Cucuteni-Trypillia, after the two villages where its first remains were excavated, Cucuteni in Romania in 1884 and Tripolye in Ukraine in 1893. Most archaeology textbooks give it a single paragraph, somewhere between the Mesolithic forages and the Indo-European migrations. The standard story is that Cucuteni-Trypillia was a Neolithic farming culture, made beautiful painted pottery, lived in modest agricultural villages for 2,000 years, and faded away. Aerial photography in the 1960s and ground-penetrating radar surveys in the 2000s and 2010s have rewritten that story almost entirely. The discoveries that changed everything came in two waves. First, in 1964, a Soviet pilot taking aerial photographs of the steppe noticed concentric rings of subtle vegetation patterns in the soil, circles within circles, on a scale of square kilometers. Soviet archaeologists investigated. They found that the rings marked the foundations of a vast settlement, with houses arranged in oval bands around a central open space. They named it Talyanki. It covered roughly 450 hectares, the size of 1,000 football pitches. They estimated that it had held perhaps 14,000 people. For decades, Talyanki was treated as an outlier. Then in the 2000s, a German team led by Johannes Mueller and Knut Rassmann began applying high-resolution geomagnetic survey to a series of Trypillian sites in central Ukraine. The technique reveals subsurface anomalies, burned soil patches, foundation lines, post holes, to a depth of about 2 meters without digging. What it revealed was not one anomalous megasite. It revealed that megasites were the norm. Majdanetsky, Nebelivka, Dobrovody, at least 24 settlements over 30 hectares, several of them over 300 hectares, with house counts in the thousands. The dates ran from roughly 4,500 to 3,000 BC. At the largest sites, occupied around 4,000 to 3,500 BC, between 2,000 and 3,000 houses were arranged in tightly packed rings, with concentric streets between them, large public structures at intervals, and open central squares, perhaps used for assemblies or markets. The population estimates from the radar surveys are conservative. But even conservative numbers put these settlements at scales not seen elsewhere in the world for another 1,500 years. The houses themselves were two-story constructions of timber posts plastered with clay daub, with thatched roofs and decorated interiors. Excavations have revealed that the upper floor was the living space, hearth, sleeping platforms, painted walls, and the ground floor was used for storage of grain, ceramics, and tools. The walls were sometimes painted with the same red, white, and black geometric patterns that decorate the famous Trypillian pottery. These were not the lean-to shelters of a transhuman people. These were proper homes, built for permanence. And then, every 60 to 80 years, the inhabitants set their cities on fire. The evidence for cyclical burning is unmistakable. Almost every excavated Trypillian house has been burned in place. The fires were hot enough to vitrify the clay daub, turning it into a glassy ceramic that has preserved the impressions of the original timber framing for 6,000 years. The fires happened deliberately. Houses were emptied of their valuables before being burned. judging from the relative scarcity of high-value items in the destruction debris. After burning, a new settlement was constructed within a few kilometers, often built on a slightly different geometric plan. The cycle repeated for 2,000 years. Why they did this is the central unanswered question of Cucuteni-Trypillia archaeology. The hypotheses fall into several rough categories. Some scholars argue for ritual cause, that the cyclical burning was a religious renewal ceremony, perhaps timed to a generation, perhaps connected to ancestor cult, or to a calendar-based cosmological renewal. Others argue for practical causes, that the wattle and daub structures degraded after several decades, that pest infestation built up, that local soils became exhausted, and that burning was simply the cleanest way to start over. Still others propose social causes, that the political structure of the megasites required periodic restart to prevent the accumulation of inheritable property and rigid hierarchies. The remarkable thing is what is missing from the Trypillian archaeological record. There are essentially no fortifications. There are essentially no royal tombs, no concentrations of valuable goods that would mark a ruling class, no monumental structures to glorify a leader. There are no signs of warfare on a scale visible to archaeology, no mass graves of warriors, no defensive walls, no dramatic destruction layers caused by other people. The megasites of Cucuteni-Trypillia look, from the artifacts, like remarkably egalitarian settlements that organized themselves on a scale beyond anything else in the prehistoric world, without the apparent emergence of kings or warlords or priestly dynasties. This is uncomfortable for traditional theories of urbanization, which assume that cities require centralized authority. Cucuteni-Trypillia megasites suggest that human beings can organize themselves at the city scale without obvious state structures, at least for substantial periods of time. How they did it administratively, who decided where the houses went, who organized the periodic burnings and resettlement, these are questions the evidence does not yet answer. Some scholars suspect a council and clan structure, similar to certain Iroquoian longhouse confederacies. Others suspect we are simply missing a class of evidence: perishable wooden tally systems, knotted records, fabric markers, that would explain the administration if it had survived. The Trypillian collapse is also poorly understood. The megasites stop being built around 3500 BC. Settlements continue at smaller scale for another 500 years, then disappear by 3000 BC. The traditional explanation involves the arrival of horse-borne pastoralists from the Pontic steppe. The cultures that recent ancient DNA studies have linked to the spread of Indo-European languages into Europe. There is genetic evidence for this contact in the recovered DNA from later burials. There is also evidence for climate shift around the same period. As with most collapses, no single cause appears sufficient. What disappears almost completely with the collapse is the painted pottery, the geometric house construction, and the planned city tradition. The peoples that succeed Cucuteni-Trypillia in the same territory build smaller settlements in less geometric layouts. They do not paint their pottery in the same elaborate style. They do not build megasites. The trace of 2,000 years of unique civilizational practice ends, archaeologically, within a generation or two. Cucuteni-Trypillia matters because it changes what we think the human past looked like. Standard textbooks tell a story in which urban civilization originated in Mesopotamia around 4000 BC, spread to Egypt and the Indus Valley, and reached Europe much later through Greek colonization. The megasites of Trypillia were already large cities by the time the first writing was being scratched into Mesopotamian clay. They were the largest human settlements in the world for several centuries, and they vanished before they could leave a written record of themselves, leaving only burned clay, painted pots, and concentric rings in the wheat fields. We do not know what they called themselves. We do not know what language they spoke. We only know that for 2,000 years, in the heart of Europe, people lived together in numbers and patterns that no later European generation would match until the Roman Empire, 1,500 years afterwards.